said that. Okay. This is Elmer Gray of the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension Service and a representative of the mosquito control profession. I appreciate you taking the time to view this presentation about mosquito biology and control. Category 41 was created during a time of transition in the mosquito control profession. The concept of the mosquito-only category was initiated at the Board of Directors meetings for the Georgia Mosquito Control Association as an effort to provide more focused training for county mosquito control personnel. By the time the category manual was completed and published and the license in place, the industry had experienced quite a shift from the county-based mosquito control programs to a more private pest control operated mosquito control programs. The thought being, though, no matter who was doing the work, that the Category 41 would provide a more focused training about mosquitoes, mosquito biology, mosquito control, and would prepare our technicians more thoroughly to deal with the public as they were out doing their work in a very visible profession where oftentimes people will stop and ask questions because you are out and about in the neighborhoods and the communities. As you begin to familiar yourself with the Category 41 manual, you'll see that each chapter has a list of learning objectives. These brief statements represent the most important topics presented in the chapter and will be the focus of this review. Mosquitoes have been a problem in Georgia since the earliest times. The earliest English settlers recorded notes at Fort King George when it was being constructed along the Altamaha River in Darien about how bad the mosquitoes were. And surely I think we're all aware that they were probably a problem much earlier than that throughout the history of Georgia. As the rice culture was developed in coastal Georgia, mosquitoes were even more of a problem with malaria and yellow fever becoming rampant. As early as 1817 to 1829, Savannah used tax monies to convert adjacent lands from a wetland rice culture to a dry field culture in an effort to suppress the mosquito populations. This is the first time that local tax monies were used for mosquito abatement and represents a model that's still used to this day of local monies using to solve local problems. The scientific classification of the mosquito is a kind of integral part as we move forward into this training session. All living things are divided into plants and animals. The animals are subsequently divided into phylum, with arthropod being the largest phylum with the most numerous of animals in it. This phylum is represented by paired jointed appendages with exoskeletons. The insects fall into this phylum with three main body sections. The insects are divided into orders. The order Diptera is where the mosquitoes fall under, with all two-winged flies, and down to the genus and species. In this example, the species is Saurophaga ferox, and the main thing I want you to see here is the two names, the two by name nomenclature, with Saurophora being the genus and ferox being the species, and these will either be in italics or underlined for a species name. Mosquitoes are semi-aquatic in that they all require water to develop. This is something that's real essential. There's questions, do they come from wet grass and such? No, they have to have water for the larvae and pupae to develop. The adult mosquitoes are long-legged, as most of us are aware. They have one pair of wings. They have scales on their wing margins and veins, and a long proboscis. There's a number of flies that look similar to a mosquito, but won't have that long proboscis to separate them. The mosquito life cycle is represented by a complete metamorphosis. The eggs are laid in rafts or singularly and can hatch in 24 to 48 hours. I've had some work I've done recently, and the eggs were hatching in around 36 hours, so that's right in that time frame. Larval stage has 4 instars. They'll feed on virtually anything that's in the water column. The pupal stage is a non-feeding stage, and a stage that they pass through rather quickly. The adult emerges onto the water surface, with many of them not flying far from where they emerge. The lifespan of mosquitoes can range from a half a month to 6 months, depending on the species. There are approximately 3,000 species of mosquitoes in the world, about 150 in the United States, and about 63 in Georgia. So the variety or the variation in this lifespan and the number of the factors that we're going to go into corresponds with this large number of species. The cycle typically takes 6 days to months, depending on the species and the conditions. When we say the cycle, that's from the egg to the adult, and that largely plays into the water temperature that the larvae and pupae are developing in, and that's related oftentimes to the nighttime temperatures. How it cools off at night is how the water will stay warm or not during the day. Mosquitoes typically have 3 different variations on their egg-laying habits. The female mosquito will select locations for the egg deposition that will provide suitable conditions for the larval development. That goes across the board for all of the mosquitoes. Some of the mosquitoes will lay their eggs individually on the water surface. Others will have them glued together in rafts. The raft of mosquito eggs will be about the size of a grain of rice and have 150 to 200 eggs in it at once. They'll be floating on the water surface. Or the eggs will be oviposited individually out of the water. If they're laid out of the water, they'll be resistant to desiccation. They won't dry out for a couple years typically, and there's some kind of hatching stimulus involved. When egg is laid on wet mud, it's flooded. If the water stays there for long enough to lose its dissolved oxygen, that's a stimulus to cause the egg to hatch. And basically, there's that low dissolved oxygen is related to a lot of nutrients and bacterial action going on in the water. And the specifics, again, vary among species. But the 3 things here is the eggs are either laid on the water surface individually, glued together in rafts, or oviposited individually out of the water. This is just an example of a raft of eggs. And again, this is something that is characteristic of the Culex mosquitoes. And they are hydrophobic. They resist water. They sit very high on the water surface. So when they're fresh, they're very evident. They become black. They're about the size of a grain of rice. And once you see them and realize what they are, you won't mistake them. Individual mosquito eggs are much more difficult to see. Typically, they'll lay either above the water surface in a bucket or something, container, and then when that bucket gets more water in it or a tire, those eggs will hatch when the dissolved oxygen gets low enough, or they'll be laid on mud where they would not be visible to the naked eye. Mosquito larvae are commonly called wigglers. They breathe at the water surface through their air tube. They quickly dive from the surface of the water when they're disturbed, and they're sensitive to light changes. So that's something to remember there when you're doing surveillance, out looking at standing water to see if there's mosquito larvae in it. You want to approach it from the side away from the sun so your shadow doesn't go over the water surface first. That shadow will cause the change in light will cause the larvae to dive down into the substrates. Oftentimes they'll hide under leaves and such, and it will be hard to see. They have numerous hairs, which are important for identification purposes, and control is important for the larval stage because they're confined to a specific area. In this image, you see there's 9 larvae, and they would all be within an area of a quarter of water surface, whereas once they emerge, they can be in your whole house. And that's just an example on a small scale, but as you can imagine, when the mosquitoes emerge, they can spread out and cover a much larger area. So control is really important for the larvae. You have them confined in a dense population that are easier to target. The larvae are described as indiscriminate filter feeders. They typically feed on particles less than 50 microns. The mouth parts consist of spicules and setae, which work together as brushes and combs to form the mouth brushes in general. The movement of the mouth brushes will create a current that draws particles into the mouth, and the larvae will also browse on algae, bacteria, and fungi, the things growing in standing water. The larva will stop feeding towards the end of their fourth instar, and this is important when we use larvicides like Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, or BTI, as it's commonly called. The larvae have to ingest the particles of this larvicide for mortality to be caused. And as the larvae approach the end of their fourth instar, they'll stop feeding as they're transitioning into the pupal stage. So the larval stage and how large they are is an important aspect when you're trying to control the larvae. This is just an image of what larvae would look like in a natural habitat. As you see, there's various sizes, shapes, positions, but the mosquito larvae is has a distinctive structure, and I believe my next image is going to show that. Yes, here's a great diagram showing both an Anopheles larvae and a Culex larvae. The Anopheles larvae on the left shows the head at the upper portion of the slide, the thorax, the middle section, and then the abdomen is the longer section with 8 segments, or 9 segments. You'll notice at the bottom of the left larvae, there's no tube. On the larvae to the right, there's an air tube in the right-hand corner of the slide there. That's the siphon that it uses to breathe at the water surface. The Anopheles larvae will lay perpendicular or lay horizontal to the water surface, where the other mosquito larvae will hang from the air tube at a 45-degree angle. So the Anopheles lay flat across the water surface. The other mosquito larvae hang from the surface, as you'll see in most images. You notice the various hairs and spines on these larvae. Mosquito identification is not as difficult as most of the other insects that we deal with. They have a lot of distinctive structures and hairs. The fourth instar larvae is the stage of the larvae that are used for taxonomic keys, or the adult females. So that's something to remember. The female mosquito, because she bites, she's looking for blood to produce her eggs. The male mosquito does not bite. So it's the females and the fourth instar larvae are used in the taxonomic keys. Mosquito pupae are commonly called tumblers, and that's describing the movement through the water column when they're disturbed. Also, mosquito larvae are active, which is kind of unusual. You have complete metamorphosis, as we described. You have the egg, larvae, pupae. You think about a butterfly pupae, which would be the chrysalis, is glued to a piece of vegetation and is stationary. Mosquito pupae are very active. It's a brief transitional stage in which the adult mosquito is developing within the pupal covering. Typically takes 2 to 3 days. Once you see the pupae occurring, the adult mosquitoes will be emerging quick. So it's one thing as a control, from a control aspect. If you see mosquito pupae in a habitat, you know that you need to stay there, do your control measurements, whether it be a surface film or draining or emptying the site, whatever needs to be done. The adult will be emerging quick, so you need to be careful about that. Control options are limited for the pupae. They don't feed, as I've said, so the surface film products are typically what are used if you have a habitat with mosquito pupae in it. In the surface film, in the old days, they would use diesel fuel. That's something that's not done today. I want to stress that. They have high alcohol that will spread across the surface of a substrate. They're very easy to use, very effective, and they prohibit the pupae from breathing at the water surface, and they reduce the surface tension so the larvae can't attach to the water surface and breathe as well. This is an example of a pupae, and you can kind of see how the adult mosquito is wrapped up inside that skin. The head would be in the lower right, the wings across the center, the abdomen enclosed in the left portion. Adult emergence is a rather fascinating aspect of mosquito biology. The pupae are lighter than water, so they'll typically be suspended at the water surface. As I said, when they're disturbed, they can move down into the water, but they have an air bubble in their cephalothorax, the chest region of the upper region of the pupae, and the adult can ingest air out of that bubble. So the skin will split along the back, and the adult mosquito will emerge up onto the water surface. And it's real important that the area where they emerge be a protected area with limited wind and wave activity. So that's oftentimes where your mosquito activity, the larvae and pupae, will be around the very edges of ponds and wetlands, or in areas where there's a lot of vegetation and protection. This protects them from fish, and it protects them from wind and waves that would drown the emerging adults. This is a great series of images I like to use. You see the adult mosquito emerging up onto the water surface, and this is a species that you'll notice the adult mosquito at the bottom there, the proboscis comes out and has a 90-degree bend. That's a very unique mosquito. That's a Toxorhynchites, and that mosquito does not feed on blood. Both the male and female of the Toxorhynchites feed on nectar alone. It's not a biting species. Oftentimes people ask, what good are mosquitoes? It's hard to say that mosquitoes are much good due to their blood feeding of the females and their disease transmission. But this species does not bite. The larvae of this species are predaceous and feed on other mosquitoes. So if there is a good mosquito, this is it. But that's a Toxorhynchites with a bent proboscis. They do not blood feed. All they do is feed on nectar. This chart summarizes the stages of the different genera of mosquitoes. It's an old diagram, but it's very effective and something that's hard to top. Across the top, you see the eggs. The Anopheles lay their eggs singly on the water surface. Each of their eggs actually has like floats on each side of it. So those eggs are laid individually. In the center are the Aedes mosquitoes. Eggs are laid singly, either on wet soil, wet mud, as a floodwater type mosquito, or a container breeder where they lay them above the water surface in buckets and tires. To the right, you see the rafts of eggs of the Culex mosquitoes. Below that, you'll see the larval stages. And you notice on the left is the Anopheles larvae, as I mentioned, laying parallel to the water surface, as opposed to the other mosquito larvae, which will typically hang from the water surface, as demonstrated there. The pupae across the center are essentially very similar. They're difficult to separate out, and they're not used in taxonomic keys for identification because of their similarity. Other than that, you see the different postures of the biting mosquito. The Anopheles group is different in a number of ways. You see the posture of the biting female, and also the palps are long as the proboscis, whereas the other mosquitoes have short palps. So that separates the Anopheles out very quick when you're doing your taxonomic work. The adult mosquito has the head, thorax, and abdomen, like all insects do. The head has the antennae and sensory apparatus. The thorax has the legs and wings attached for locomotion, and the abdomen is primarily for digestive purposes. So the head, thorax, and abdomen, 3 pairs of legs, and the common mosquito structure. They do have 2 wings, as opposed to most other insects that will have 4 wings. You think your butterflies, they got the 4 wings. Mosquitoes have 2 wings. Diptera means 2-winged flies. But behind the wing, there's a haltere, which is a remnant of the second wing on that side, and is used for balance during flight. The adult mosquito, this is an image of the male. You notice the big bushy antennae. This is very important. The male mosquitoes are very easy to separate from the females as a result of their bushy antennae, their plumose. We seldom see the male mosquitoes for the fact that they only feed on nectar. And if you catch them during surveillance activities, or if you're catching male mosquitoes, that's indicative that the emergence site is very nearby. So they haven't had as much chance to disperse into the environment. So if you're catching males, chances are that the area where the larvae are developing is very close. But the thing you want to pick up on there, the males have the bushy antennae as opposed to the females, where they're very sparse, have very little spines on their antennae. And you see they have panels on the sides of their abdomen. This mosquito's blood feeding is about fully engorged, so she will ingest that blood meal and fly off into the vegetation, digest it for 2 or 3 days, and then she'll be ready to lay her eggs. She lays her eggs, and then she's going to come back and look for another blood meal to do it again. That's how the disease transmission takes place with mosquitoes. They get their one blood meal, lay their eggs. If they live long enough to get subsequent blood meals, they can pick up a virus from one animal. It develops in their body, and they transmit it to the next animal when they're getting their second blood meal. Identification is critical. As we progress as mosquito control specialists, you have to know what species you're dealing with. And that's critical with most all pest control. It allows you, when you identify to the species, then we can look up in the literature and the books and find the life history of this species, whether it's a vector or just a nuisance, whether it transmits disease. Vector means transmitting a pathogen from one animal to another. Or is it just a nuisance where it just bothers you from its incessant biting? By identifying the specimen, the species, you can target the larval habitats. Each species has a preferred habitat where they'll like to develop, and that helps us find that habitat. It will also provide us flight range information. How far are they coming from? If we're having a problem in the neighborhood, are these mosquitoes coming from within the neighborhood in containers and buckets, or are they coming from the salt marsh down the road? So it's important, very important. I can't stress it enough to identify what exactly the pest is that you're dealing with. And mosquito identification, as I said, is more readily. There's training available through the public health department. Oftentimes has training sessions, and it's a much more doable thing. They have a lot of distinguishing characteristics. Mosquito identification has been ongoing for a long time, and there's a lot of good keys that are readily available, and there's training available to help. This is just an example of a pictorial key to some of the female mosquitoes. You see across the top there, the Encephalitis have the long palps. That would immediately separate it from the other mosquitoes with the shorter palps. Next branch there on the key, you see the Toxorhynchidae with the bent proboscis as opposed to a straight proboscis, and you move on down, separating from this characteristic to characteristic. So identification is important. There's training available, and it's not something to be intimidated by. It's very doable. Larval mosquito habitats. The primary thing you want to focus on here is standing stationary water. Virtually any type of standing water can be suitable for larval development. The larval food source, whether there's bacteria and algae and suspended organic materials, is important. The areas will often be protected from wind and waves through vegetation and other shielding features. Mosquitoes don't typically develop in ponds with fish populations. That's something really important to remember. You come up to you're working in the neighborhood and they're telling you about their mosquito problems. You get to looking around and you see areas and sneak up on the edge of a substrate or habitat and you see mosquito fish or minnows go off through the vegetation. That's typically not going to be where the problem's coming from. You need to keep on looking because oftentimes there'll be some other area that's holding water that doesn't have fish. So the farm ponds and things like this are not typically where fish populations are developing. But any item that is in a yard or in a neighborhood that can hold water, that is much more susceptible to having larval development in it. The Centers for Disease Control classifies mosquitoes into groups by the type of habitat that the larvae develop in, which is indicative of where the female mosquito has laid her eggs. The permanent pool group is represented by shallow margins of ponds, lakes, smaller impoundments, the degree of permanency, and abundant vegetation. Now, I'm saying there that mosquitoes don't typically develop in ponds. Well, they're going to be in area, if they are in ponds and lakes, it's going to be in areas that are choked with vegetation around the edges. So That's an area where the fish can't get to the larvae, and the larvae can develop there. But large fish populations will suppress the mosquitoes. The transient water group, this is more water that's here and gone. Roadside ditches after wet periods, ground pools, irrigated lands where excess irrigation builds water stands in the bottom corner of a field. These areas, if the water's there long enough, will produce mosquitoes. The floodwater group, these are the group of mosquitoes that will lay their eggs on damp soils and then are flooded intermittently, whether it's roadside ditches or river bottoms or the upper parts of salt marshes. In the coastal areas, the mosquito control districts can often time their mosquito emergences by the moon, and the high tides will push water to the upper reaches of the salt marshes, and so they know from the moon cycle when there's the best chance of having large outbreaks of the salt marsh mosquitoes. And that will also be tied if they have a full moon and winds from the east to drive the water particularly high, then they know that those certain areas where the upper parts of the marshes flood will be susceptible to the pest problems. The tree hole and artificial container group is another group, and this whole group certainly started from the tree hole aspect and then moved over and to capitalize on the containers and debris that we produce in our modern living. So the four groups there, want to come out of this, there's a permanent pool group, transient water group, the floodwater group, and the tree hole and artificial container group. Freshwater swamp, this is from down in Chatham County. You'll notice it choked with vegetation. So the fish would be out in that open area. You got dense vegetation on both sides of it, which would be areas where mosquitoes could develop. The Anopheles mosquitoes like habitats like this. Retention ponds. This is a new type of mosquito environment or habitat that has been created really over the last 20 to 30 years. The concept of retention ponds are good, preventing flooding, reducing runoff, allowing water to recharge into a pond environment that had no natural predators initially, and oftentimes after the development occurs is left for the county to maintain, or the community is left holding the bag with the retention pond and the standing water that is produced by it. These environments are very good for mosquito fish. This is an area, mosquito fish is a surface feeding minnow. So you have a biological control agent. You can put these minnows in these ponds, and they're very effective predators of the mosquito larvae, and they are tolerant of lower dissolved oxygen. So they're better for marginal waters where a brim or a bass couldn't survive in the heat of the summer. The mosquito fish, the Gambusia finis, is a very durable predator that can exist in these environments. And they're available through fisheries across the south, and we also have some. You can contact me through the Extension Service, and we may be able to provide them that way as well. Transient water, the cattail swamp will be a good indication of an area that's wet in the spring when there's rains or wet periods, and then can dry up other times of the year. And that wetting and drying is real key in that it limits the number of predators. So there's not many fish going to be there because that's an area that could dry up part of the time. When the area dries and then when it floods, the first thing to capitalize on that flooding oftentimes will be the mosquitoes. So cattail swamps will be in the transient water, as would like a roadside ditch that holds water during wet periods, doesn't drain properly, and then dries out. So again, the natural predators aren't typically there. And this is something where proper design is important, and the county road departments and such can be involved in helping to make sure that drainage occurs properly. Clearing and maintaining drainage is a vital part of mosquito suppression. And as far as source reduction, that's something that maybe pest control operators wouldn't necessarily be involved with. But if you see a site like that occurs in a community or around one of your clients, you may want to contact the public service folks to the public works and see if there's something that they can do about improving the drainage in the area. Dredge spoil sites. These are something that occur along the coast. You see the man walking across the surface and the large cracks. When they pump the mud or dredge the mud up into these sites, it dries with deep cracks. The floodwater mosquitoes will go down in those cracks. Oftentimes there'll be water down in them, lay their eggs on that wet mud. When this area has more water pumped into it or it floods from heavy rains, they can produce tremendous mosquito populations. Dredge spoil sites are notorious for their mosquito production, and that's something that would often be controlled through aerial applications of larvicides by county programs, but it's something to be aware of all the same. Salt marsh is another area where the floodwater mosquitoes often can be a problem, as I described with the full moon and the high tides. In the center of this image, you see a part of the wetland with clear water to the left and the dark shading to the right. That dark shading is mosquito larvae and pupae. So you can imagine, this image was taken from about 10 or 30 feet, 10 yards above the surface of the marsh. And when you can see the mosquito larvae from 30 feet above the marsh from the helicopter, you can understand why mosquito control is so important to the coastal regions. Artificial containers are something that are more prominent in the upstate and are something that as homeowners and communities we can focus on in a more manageable fashion. The corrugated pipes that are put in place feed under driveways or from below downspouts both have the potential to hold water and produce mosquitoes in our neighborhoods and homes. So this is something, as a pest control operator, you come into a yard for a call, you're trying to figure out where the mosquitoes will be coming from. You want to look down first. Look for the lowest area. Where's the water draining to during wet periods, and then where is it going to stand once it gets there? Below the pipes of driveways, there's an area where that image in the top right corner, there's going to be grass clippings get in there that's kind of blown out from the heavy rains when there's large runoff. There's going to be a hole there. It's going to get a lot of nutrients from the grass clippings. That's a perfect environment for larvae to grow. Storm drains are an area that in the past was not a focus of mosquito control, but with the introduction of West Nile virus, have become a real target for mosquito suppression. The mosquito that transmits West Nile virus likes to develop in the storm drain system. As you can imagine, there's a lot of pipes laid underground. There's always going to be low spots where the water stands. During dry periods, there'll be limited water standing in areas of these pipes that will get very nutrient rich and is very attractive to the southern house mosquito that is the primary vector of West Nile virus in Georgia. During wet periods, the storm drains are constantly flushed out. There's limited mosquito production that occurs, and West Nile is not typically as much of a problem during wet years as it is during dry years when water stands in the storm drain systems. Used tires are a huge concern from a mosquito control aspect. This is the image of a recycling site in Alabama that I was involved with, but they occur throughout the southeast and across the country, I'm sure. The tires, the water gets in them. It stays artificially high due to the black color, and there's a variety of mosquitoes that like to use these habitats, and the Asian tiger mosquito is one of the best. That's one of our primary pests in Georgia now, and it was imported in used tires, and the tire industry is a real concern. And as you see them in our communities and neighborhoods, it's something that you need to be focused on. Any place there's a tire, there's potential for mosquito production, and oftentimes there's more than one tire there. The beauty of it is that when you remove that tire from the community, tire recycling programs, dumps will usually take tires. You get rid of that tire, you've permanently eliminated a breeding site that was in the neighborhood. So tire removal is a key aspect of mosquito suppression as well. Used pools that aren't in service can be significant mosquito producers. The economic downturn of recent years has led to a lot of abandoned pools, and these sites can cause problems for a whole community. So it's important you're at a client to look over the fence, see what's going on around you. Houses that are up for sale, that have pools, are notorious mosquito producers in communities. A few species that are particularly common and problematic for us here in Georgia. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito. This is a distinct mosquito that is black and white striped. It's an introduced pest. As I said, it was introduced into Houston, Texas in the mid-'80s. By 1994, it was throughout the state of Georgia. Today, it ranges north to across the Midwest, past New Jersey, and over most of the eastern United States. Any kind of container, it's described as a container breeding mosquito. Tires are particularly bad for it, but anything that holds water in our yards has the potential to produce Asian tiger mosquito. It's typically a warm weather pest. It's described as a daytime biter, so when we go home in the evenings after work, you're getting bit by mosquitoes around your backyard during daylight. This is often the mosquito that will be causing the problem. It's black and white, as I said. It prefers to bite down low. One thing to look for is English ivy has become a kind of a keynote to me, is anything like the English ivy that has a dense vegetation down at ground level. This provides an area of harborage, we would call it, where the adult mosquito will hide in there during the heat of the day to avoid drying out in the sun. And then as the shadows become long in the evening, they'll be out and be active until sunset or just thereafter. When we describe it as a daytime biter, that's what we mean is that, last 2 hours of light in the afternoon, first 2 hours of light in the morning is the preferred time of activity. If you disturb them in other parts of the day, they'll come after you as well. They're notorious for their short flight range. So if you have a client that's being bothered by this species, they typically aren't coming from very far away. 100 yards, it's a football field. You can kind of look and you can probably see the habitat where it's emerged from. The southern house mosquito, Culex quinquefasciatus. This is the primary vector of West Nile virus. This is a mosquito that wasn't typically a target of mosquito control prior to 2001 when West Nile showed up in Georgia. It's a mosquito that typically feeds after dark. As I said, the larvae like to develop in polluted water. The storm drains during dry periods, that water gets very putrid, will be a good site for it. Lagoons around agricultural areas also can be highly productive, so that's another thing to be aware of. Targeting catch basins, that's something. The West Nile virus has spurred the development of a number of products of larvicide designed for treating catch basins, and that's something that as you do work in a community, around retirement homes, around schools, you should definitely target the catch basins to suppress the southern house mosquito. They overwinter as adults. This is a mosquito that will live a long time. They overwinter down in the storm drains, in the barns, in protected areas. Can come out when it warms up in the summer or in the fall. They can be active on cold days during the winter. I stand corrected. During the winter, on warm days, they will become active. Then on the cold nights, they'll go back into their harborage in the storm drain or in the back of a barn or someplace protected, and resume activity in the spring when it gets warm again. Ocleritatis taeniorhynchus, the black salt marsh. This is the primary salt marsh mosquito on the East Coast and the primary pest along the coastal areas, from Massachusetts around Florida to the Gulf Coast. This is the primary mosquito that the coastal mosquito districts will target, but everyone needs to be aware of it because it has a very strong flight range. So they'll fly up 5 to 10 miles from the coastal areas, can get blown further than that. They have a distinct band on their proboscis. The wings are very dark. They're kind of a distinctive mosquito from that standpoint. This is a floodwater mosquito, so the eggs are laid in the upper salt marshes, and during high tides of floods and moon, there'll be mass emergences. Saurophorus ciliata, the gall nipper. This is our largest mosquito and is one that often is noticed after hurricanes. It's about twice the size of our common mosquitoes, about twice the size of that Asian tiger mosquito, and it has long scales on its legs. As you can see by this image, the legs look kind of shaggy. This is a floodwater mosquito as well, and it is native to Georgia. It's native to most of the eastern United States, but every so often after a hurricane, there'll be large outbreaks of them, and the news stories start about this giant mosquito or this tropical mosquito that was blown in with the storm. That's incorrect. These are native to the eastern United States, and it's a floodwater species. So when we have areas get wet after being dry for a number of years, we can have large populations of them, and they are twice the size of most of our other mosquitoes, so they're very noticeable when they're present. A couple other important or interesting species you need to be aware of. Anopheles quadrimaculatus is the common malaria mosquito. This is the mosquito that transmitted malaria in Georgia long ago. It feeds mostly at night, and oftentimes the explanation for why malaria is not very common now is that as people put screens on their homes, people weren't available to the feeding female mosquitoes. So this transmission cycle got stopped from a screening standpoint. Culicida melanura is the black-tailed mosquito. This mosquito is important because it's the vector of eastern equine encephalitis in birds, from mosquitoes to birds. It rarely bites humans, but it develops supports the transmission cycle in the swamps. So you end up with a lot of birds and mosquitoes carrying the virus, and then occasionally another type of mosquito will feed on a bird, pick it up, and transmit the mosquito out of that cycle to a human or a horse. So the Culicida melanura is the base mosquito for the eastern equine encephalitis with birds. Aedes vexans is a very common mosquito. It's also a floodwater mosquito. Its common name is the inland floodwater mosquito. Roadside ditches and things across the state can be one of our most common mosquitoes. Ocleritatis solicitans, the tan salt marsh mosquito, another floodwater mosquito. And Ocleritatis triceriatus, the eastern treehole mosquito. This is the primary vector of Crosse encephalitis. This is an important mosquito in that Crosse encephalitis is a very serious disease for children, and you don't think of tree holes as being a real common larval habitat, but obviously they're out there, particularly in hardwood forests. Tree holes can be filled with sand or cement and permanently eliminate a site. Mosquitoes as vectors of disease. We're going to pick it up here a little bit. The malaria is still the most important mosquito-borne disease worldwide. It's estimated there's 400 million cases around the world. Could be as many as 2 million human deaths each year. Sadly, this is mostly children across Africa and the tropical regions of Asia. It's transmitted by several species of the Anopheles mosquito. It's caused by a protozoan parasite, Plasmodium, either ovale, malariae, vivax, or falciparum, and causes chills, fever, sweating, headache, and death eventually if left untreated. So malaria is still very important. We can't talk about mosquitoes without talking about it. There's a lot of research being done looking at genetic modifications and the various aspects of mosquito control. Bed nets are a huge thing to try to prevent the bite of the Anopheles mosquito. But we can't forget this disease. Thankfully, it's not very present in Georgia today. However, West Nile virus is still present, as is eastern equine encephalitis. Crosse encephalitis. St. Louis encephalitis has been present in the past. Dengue is a viral disease that's rampant across the South America and Asia right now. It's had a resurgence in activity. Has not been common in the United States recently, but has been present along the Texas border and in South Florida to some degree. Chikungunya is another viral disease that is has spread recently across Africa and into Europe, and is thought to be one that could possibly show up in the United States. It can be vectored by the Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito, so that's a real concern for mosquito control professionals. The key with any of these mosquito-borne diseases is to prevent the bite. If you can prevent the bite, you can prevent exposure to the virus or the pathogen that causes the disease. And what I want to stress here is the use of EPA-registered repellents. It's very important that we use repellents that have demonstrated in research trials that they are effective over a wide range of conditions. When we're talking about mosquito-borne diseases, I don't like to hear about garlic and skin so soft and other things that have been shown not to be as effective as DEET, picaridin. Oil of lemon eucalyptus is a recently approved product. So there are a number of EPA-registered repellents that should be used, particularly when there's a potential for disease transmission. It's important to realize that DEET is the product of choice for children. It's approved for children as young as 2 months of age, and it's important that we apply it to our hands of the adult and then rub the child down. Do not let the children apply it to themselves. But using repellents to prevent mosquito bites is the best way to prevent mosquito-borne disease. West Nile virus is primarily a bird-to-mosquito cycle. It was first identified in the United States in 1999. As I mentioned, the southern house mosquito is the primary vector. 2012 was a record year for West Nile virus. It was found in all 48 contiguous states, and we had 100 cases in Georgia with 6 deaths. Prior to that, the highest number of cases we'd had is 55 per year. So last year was a very active year for West Nile virus. The feeling was that the unusually dry conditions coming out of winter across the country and the unusually warm conditions initiated the mosquito cycle earlier, and it confined the mosquitoes and the birds to what standing water was available. So it was warm, the mosquitoes were out early, the birds and the mosquitoes were at what limited water was left during the dry periods, and the cycle exploded much earlier than normal and to a much larger degree. Humans and horses are described as incidental hosts or dead-end hosts for the West Nile virus. And what that means is we do not develop enough virus in our system. When an infected mosquito bites us, we have virus in our system that can make us sick, but we don't develop enough virus in our system for another mosquito to bite us and take it to someone else. Only birds develop a high enough virus level to transmit to another mosquito. Eastern equine encephalitis is a disease that's common along the eastern seaboard. In Georgia, it's typically below the fall line. Most cases are from Macon to the coast. It's a serious disease in that the fatality rate can be over 50%. Oftentimes, it's preceded by animal cases, whether it be horses, emus, things like this can be kind of bellwether species for us. New research indicates that snakes may be involved in the overwintering cycle of this disease, which is very new information, just recently hit the scientific literature. The overwintering cycle has been unknown for many years, but apparently snakes can build very high levels of the virus in their system. When they come out in the spring, mosquitoes feed on them and start to cycle over. Oftentimes, the larger mosquito control programs will use sentinel chickens to monitor whether the virus is in the area or the mosquitoes are transmitting the virus in their counties. And what they do is the chickens will be put out in an area along swampy areas, and then their blood will be checked the following period to see if they were exposed to the virus. This helps the mosquito control programs know to step up their suppression efforts in the area as soon as the virus is found to be occurring. The Crosse encephalitis is another virus that is common across the southeast. It's unusual that it is a virus of mosquitoes and small mammals. Typically chipmunks and squirrels will harbor the virus. They'll build up a high level of viremia, and the mosquito can bite them, take it off somewhere else. It's a serious disease of children less than 15 years of age. And while it may not be fatal, it often will be debilitating. So that's something that's real important about this disease. The thing about encephalitis, the term encephalitis for all these viruses relates to inflammation of the brain. And that's something that it's very serious. We've heard about West Nile virus not being that serious of a disease because not that many people get sick from it. But if you do develop the encephalitis and have the inflammation lining the brain, is very serious. And La Crosse encephalitis is along those lines. Adult infections are thought to be subclinical, meaning that oftentimes adults can be exposed to this virus, not become sick, but children are much more susceptible to it. And it often occurs in localized areas. Oftentimes there'll be rural areas, and the treehole mosquito is the primary vector of this disease. So, you think about wooded areas, rural areas. East Tennessee has had a lot of it. The North Carolina mountains have had a lot of this disease as well. So it's a serious disease of children. Dog heartworm. This is something that we don't necessarily tie to mosquitoes, but infection rates for dogs left untreated can be as high as 80% at 2.5 years, and is typically 100% for dogs of 5 years of age that are left untreated in Georgia. There's approximately $60 million spent in Georgia alone. You think about all the heartworm prevention, treatment of cases of heartworm for dogs that are left unvaccinated. So heartworm is a serious problem. It's a filarial nematode that's transmitted oftentimes by the southern house mosquito, the Culex quinquefasciatus, but there are other vectors as well. So the key there is if you love your dog, you need to treat it because they will eventually come down with this disease. Integrated mosquito management. This is something that we could talk about for hours on end, but I'm going to get right to the point of it. The 5 main aspects, when we talk about integrated mosquito management, we're talking about education and communication, surveillance, source reduction, larviciding, and adulticiding. Education starts right here, just like we're doing with training for you, training for the public. We teach people about where mosquitoes occur, what they can do to prevent them in their homes and neighborhoods, what the community can do. That's where it all starts. Oftentimes, these container breeding mosquitoes, the Asian tiger mosquito, is best controlled through education. So as you pick up a client, part of your job is teaching them where their problem could be coming from and what they can do to prevent it on their own. As you initiate your surveillance and do your treatment. Surveillance is the concept and activity of searching for the habitats and populations and mapping where these occur is essential. In today's world, there's a lot of computerized mapping systems. All of them are going to be helpful, but if you need to use an old paper map, that's fine too. The main thing is that oftentimes these mosquito, the larval breeding sites will be the same from year to year. Low areas stay low, and if they have mosquitoes this year, chances are next year when it's wet, they're going to have mosquitoes as well. So getting out and looking for the habitats where the mosquitoes are developing is essential. And this involves whether it's looking over the fence, looking down the road as you approach the neighborhood or community or an address. You need to have your head on a swivel and be looking in every direction. Source reduction, eliminating the larval habitats. This is a permanent thing, whereas, like I mentioned about whether drainage can be repaired to eliminate standing water in roadside ditches, whether the tire can be removed from the community and that larval habitat be permanently eliminated. Source reduction is the concept of eliminating where the larvae develop. If the site cannot be eliminated through source reduction, there's a number of different products that can be used for larviciding. And this includes the bacterial, the Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis that I mentioned, the BTI. There are insect growth regulators. The methoprene products are very good. The surface film, the Agnique is the product that's used for the surface film, the specialized alcohol product. Any of these are safe for animals, but they are very effective at suppressing the mosquito populations. So that's something that we want to target the larvae when they're in that concentrated habitat and are easier to find, get a higher percentage of them in one spot. Adulticiding is still an extremely effective and important part of an integrated mosquito control program. When disease transmission is ongoing, adulticiding is the most effective way to stop a disease transmission situation. So whether it's on a large scale or a small scale, adulticiding can be very effective when done properly. Calibration is essential. That's something that whether you're larviciding or adulticiding, it's important that you make sure that your equipment is putting out the amount of product that it's supposed to be. The label is the law, as you're well aware, for all of your pesticide activities. But calibration is what the cost effectiveness comes in. The products are developed to be effective at the label rate. There's no need for any more. As businessmen and women, you want to put out what's needed to do the job and no more or no less. So calibrating your sprayers and your whether it's a pellet for cyclone spreader type apparatus for applying larvae or larvicide, or sprayers for adulticide, calibration is essential. And calibration is something that shouldn't be intimidating either. It's not that hard to do. You're looking to put a specific amount of product dispersed over a specified time over a specified area. It's not difficult. It's very basic math is needed, and it's something that's extremely important to obey the law and to be cost efficient. Pesticide use, risk, and safety. I'm not going to go into this too much because prior to getting this Category 41 license, you're going to have your core category license or exam as well. The main thing is to read the label and follow the label. Mosquito control is a very visible profession. You're out in the public's eye. They're going to stop and ask questions sooner or later. And by doing this training, you're going to be able to answer those questions in a more confident and effective manner. So that's really what this is all about, is building your confidence to answer the question of the first person that comes to you. Pesticide safety is everyone's responsibility. I don't know how much more we need to say about that. Whether it's the applicator following the label and using the product, the proper protection equipment for them while they're mixing and loading, or the proper calibration to assure that you're not putting any more into the environment to affect non-targets or the people who live in the neighborhood. Pesticide safety is everyone's responsibility as pesticide applicators. And liability issues are bad for business, so that all goes back to following the label. If you follow the label, you're not going to have liability issues. You're going to get good control, and it's going to be as cost efficient as it can be for that product. Program operation. This is something that kind of harkens back to the county mosquito control programs. The mosquito control director is typically a role that had developed through the years, and they're responsible for all aspects of the program. So what what the pest is, where it's developing, what the control efforts are. I guess in some ways this is something that's moving down to the individual applicators as a pest control company comes in. All of a sudden, you the applicator, are the directors. So when you go to that client, it's your job to determine what the pest is, where it's developing, what the control efforts, what your best efforts are or techniques are to suppress that pest population. So maybe this is coming all full circle here and coming back to the working folks. Public relations, this is something that when you're doing a community effort, it's important to tell people what you're going to do, why you're going to do it. This goes back to identifying the pest species, being able to target where it's likely developing, and having a good grasp of its biology as you move into the control aspects of the program. You also need to recognize that not everyone's going to support mosquito control. There's going to be concerned citizens. Beekeepers are often concerned about mosquito control activities, and it's important to communicate what you're doing. The beekeeper aspect is something that we really need to be aware of. These are entomologists also, and proper mosquito control doesn't have to be a very negative impact, negative impacts to our bee populations. Bees are typically active during the heat of the day. Most of our adult mosquito control activities are going to be conducted at dusk or just after dusk is when it's most effective. So communicating that to the beekeepers, avoiding spraying where there's beehives is something that we definitely want to try to do. So communication, getting out, telling people what you're going to do, why we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, will go a long ways to giving them confidence that we actually know what we're doing. And there again, the training provided here is going to help you be able to do this work with more confidence. Other arthropods of public health importance. As entomologists, people are going to assume that we know them all. And this is something that we need to be careful of. Know what you know and know what you don't know. Even with 28 years of experience, there's a lot of insects out there that I'm not familiar with. So don't be afraid to say you're not sure what that is, and collect a specimen and get it identified, and then come back with the life history and do some research. You don't have to have all the answers right up front. It's okay to say, I need to get a specimen and take it back to the shop and look at it. Delusory parasitosis is something that we deal with a lot in today's society. People are convinced that insects are infesting their body. That's the definition of it. Very difficult to deal with. Oftentimes people have drug interactions that will cause the crawling sensation of their skin. You need to do your best to direct them to either whether it be a dermatologist or a physician. What you don't want to do is do insecticide applications when you can't find the pest that you're trying to target. You need to be careful about that. It's misleading and not good business from a variety of standpoints. There's a number of things that another number of insects that people confuse for mosquitoes. Crane flies are the very long-legged flies that are attracted to lights in the early spring through the summer. They're semi-aquatic insects as well. They have no proboscis. So when you look at them, people often say they're giant mosquitoes. Very easy to tell that they're not because they don't have the biting mouth parts. Chironomid midges are more the size of mosquitoes, but they also do not have the proboscis for blood feeding. Biting midges, very small insect. They would be the no-see-ums of South Georgia. Very difficult to deal with from the standpoint that the larvae develop in the mud around wetlands. There's no larvicide that's labeled for midge suppression for the biting midges, and they can only be dealt with through adulticiding, and that's a very temporary treatment. Can be used for weddings and situational weekend events like that. You can do adulticiding, but biting midges are very difficult to deal with. Stable flies, house flies, deer flies, all pests that can show up from time to time and cause problems. It's important to identify the pest to be able to tell people about the biology, where they occur, what we can do to control them, and what's the most effective techniques. The key, though, I think, is that we can't know it all. Don't be afraid to collect a specimen and get it identified and come back with the full information at a later time. I believe that's going to wrap up this training session. Again, my name is Elmer Gray. I'm an entomologist with the University of Georgia Entomology Department, and my email address here is a great way to get in touch with me if you have questions about this training, want more information. Please don't hesitate to contact me. We want to provide as much information and help as we can, and we wish you the very best with this session.